Strokes, baby! That's right, friends. The garage rock revival, lo-fi, retro, indie rock legends from the 2000s return for their first album in 7 years. That's right, friends. The Strokes have, at long last, finally released their 6th studio album. This is following the 2013 release Come Down Machine. And before that, of course, my baby here, Angles. Now, some Strokes fans may argue that a few of their later albums have proven to be a bit less potent Strokes records, in that they feature less and less of the tightly knit texture that really gave Strokes their defining characteristic in their earlier discography. Naturally, this was a highly anticipated release for me for a couple reasons. Very few events match the excitement of when a band comes together for the first time in years to release an album after a long hiatus. Additionally, these guys put out 3 very exciting singles that gave the impression that the band was, in some ways, ready for a return to form, only this time in a more matured manner. It's also worth noting that there should be a level of seasoned skill and talent present on this record that each member has no doubt achieved through each of their own side projects. That's right, each of the 5 members of the Strokes, over the course of the 2010s, has broken off and started each of their own musical side projects. Come in! You got toilet paper. Frontman Julian Casablancas exercises his vocal capabilities in the art punk band The Voids, who I am a huge fan of personally. Guitarist Nick Valenci is the frontman of the rock act CRX, and bassist Nikolai Frazier has a couple of side projects, the most recent one being the alternative rock group Summer Moon. The Strokes drummer Fabrizio Moretti recently put out a debut album with his new indie rock band Machine Gun, which I actually featured on my first Jason Rex video, which you can check out right there. And then lastly, rhythm guitarist Albert Hammond Jr. has made quite the solo career for himself, releasing 4 studio albums under that name. So, as you can imagine, the Strokes have come a long way as a band and as individuals over the last 20 or so years. The big question is, does this pay off in their new album, The New Abnormal? And I'm gonna say, yes. Yes, it does. The New Abnormal was released on April 10th, 2020, and upon my very first listen, I was instantly impressed with how well the band juggles experimentation and familiarity. And wow. Julian Casablancas really delivers on this thing. His vocals really carry the album throughout its trajectory. He's sounding much more refined, much more adventurous, and this is likely due to his proggy punk experiments from The Voids. That's not to say that any of the other band members are any less vital to the whole. In fact, each of the band members' performances seems revitalized and up to the creative task of reinventing the Strokes' classic indie rock sound, which I feel like they do well enough. A lot of the material here does feel like a return to form for the band, although they are sounding a bit more reserved, a little bit lower key, even more experimental at points. The New Abnormal is sprinkled with some vaguely 80s new agey tangents, and a lot of the lo-fi retro guitar tones that characterize the Strokes' music are now sounding warped, a little distorted, even otherworldly at points. The integration works well, and it ultimately delivers a record that's characterized by its nostalgic and classic Strokes riffs, but they also pop with their own modern art rock personalities, even if some of the cuts are a bit more forgettable than others. The album starts off pretty classic for a Strokes record, although it has a bit of an unexpected 808 drum beat. It's quickly accompanied by a classic Strokes opening riff. This song didn't quite blow me away. I would actually say it's one of their less strong opening tracks, but coming from a band like the Strokes, it's still a great track. So now the second song, Selfless, is probably one of my favorite tracks on the record, actually. The composition in this song may give the illusion that this song is more laid back, a little bit slower, but in my opinion, this is one of the heavy hitters on the album. This is the first song on the record that Julian Casablancas really shows his vocal chops and what he's here to do on this record. About halfway through the track, he just lets her rip and hits this beautiful high note. He just sings these emotional lyrics, and his voice has such a beautiful tone to it. It gives me shivers every single time I listen to it, and I've listened to this track a lot of times. Brooklyn Bridge to Chorus, I believe, was released just a few days before the record. When I listened to this for the first time, it instantly caught my attention as this different upbeat track for the Strokes with these honky sort of synths that aren't really annoying, but they're just really bright and in your face and telling you, get up, let's go dance, let's go party. Honestly, just a very catchy, fun to listen to track. As is Bad Decisions, which was the second single that the Strokes released for this record, and that one seems like the hit single on the record. If there is a hit single on this record, this thing's seriously helplessly catchy. I sing this all the time. I love the retro guitar riffs on this song. Casablanca's vocal melodies that he delivers are just so enticing and singable. This song is just immensely fun, and honestly, I feel like it could join the ranks along with some of the Strokes' more beloved tracks. Eternal Summer. That's a nice little allusion there to the horrors of climate change and where our planet is headed. This song is definitely the Strokes' most experimental cut on the record, and it definitely feels like it's the album's centerpiece. Smack dab in the middle, 4 songs on either side of it. It's also the longest song at 6¼ minutes, and I would say the Strokes make decent use of this time. It starts off with Fabrizio Moretti's drumming. It's very sprawling 80s fantasy style. Kind of reminds me of something you'd hear off of his record with Machine Gun, actually, unsurprisingly. And Casablancas really takes his vocal performance on this track an extra stride when he starts shouting and singing and moaning in this punky style of vocals, which are also backed up by some very nasal sounding, very filtered synths, which are mixed in very well to the song. If they were any louder, it would be way too annoying, but I think they sit very nicely behind Casablanca's vocals in this instance. Then halfway through the song, the band returns to the A section and adds in some very, very classic indie rock sounding guitar plucks that don't sound too far off from Phoenix. Many other indie bands have used this technique as well. And the last chorus on this song is rather intense, actually. It's building and building and eventually adds in these long screeching guitar notes, and then these droning, weird sounding guitar tones on top of that, kind of putting in some weird sound effects that kind of give me vibes of an art punk band like Tropical Fuckstorm. The sound at the end of Eternal Summer is so different for the Strokes, but unsurprising at the same time, especially when you look at the Voids and the work that Julian Casablancas has been doing with that group. At the Door was the first single that the Strokes released for this record, and I was a fan of the song right away. The music video they released was so cool, beautifully animated, and honestly, the song has only grown on me from there. The cool thing about this song is that it is such a departure from their other work, even from the other songs on this album. I just love the warm, very full, robust synthesizers that give this track its texture. Absolutely cannot emphasize enough how much I love the end of this track. The sprawling, thickly textured, very sturdy sounding synthesizers mixed with the very soft, lower tone of Casablanca's voice are very sobering, and they have a grounding effect, which is honestly quite needed after the previous 3 or 4 cuts on this thing. Why, oh why? Why? Why are Sundays so depressing? I've wondered that myself every week. This song doesn't particularly answer that question, nor does it particularly give me too much else to appreciate. There's some fun, jittery guitars that don't really sound like anything new that I've heard. There's some bows that are quite amusing, and I can't really tell if they're made with a synth or some creative vocal processing, but again, it seems like a sound that I've heard before. Julian Casablancas' vocals are darker, more introspective on this track as well. But again, there's nothing super memorable about this track for me. It's not a bad track. I wouldn't necessarily skip this one. Maybe I would skip this one. Depends on the listen through, I guess. Not the Same Anymore. This one was also meh. This is my least favorite track on the record. The arpeggiating riff that starts this song off quickly becomes rather boring, and unfortunately, I would say that the rest of the song also suffers from this, largely due to the fact that that riff is a building block for the entire song, and the whole song, the melody, all the other parts are basically built off of that riff. And the track is not saved at all by the group's single layered writing throughout this entire song in the verses and in the chorus. Strums on the beat are not that neat when played on repeat. Ode to the Mets. The record's trajectory is saved and completed with this great album closer. The Strokes do bring back some of their more experimental ideas from earlier in the record, and they grab your ears with some rhythmic clashing earlier on in the song that unfortunately we don't see again, which is sad because I really liked how the song started and it didn't seem to serve much purpose for later in the song. This track does pick up once Moretti's drums kick in and Casablancas gets a bit more creative with his vocal deliveries. And the song does get more creative as layers are added, even if they all revolve around the same soft synth hook. This is a nice send-off tune. It's pretty, it's easy to listen to, and it features some engaging performances from all of the band members. And it's also nothing too heavy-hitting or inducing either. 9 songs. 9. After 7 years, I would have at least hoped for 10. What about 14? 2 per year. Oh well, I'm really not that disappointed. And it does help that most of these songs hover around the 5-minute runtime, give or take, adding up to a 45-minute runtime for the record. And it's really a mostly fulfilling listen. And the diversity is there, although I would have liked to hear a few more of the synth-driven tunes, like on At the Door or Brooklyn Bridge to chorus. The band does dream up some pretty engaging concepts, trying some new ideas and experiments and blending those rather comfortably with their tried and true Strokes formula. And yeah, there are a couple low-light tracks that maybe I didn't care for quite as much, or maybe I'll skip through when I'm listening to the album impatiently. The best tracks on this record really shine through as such, and will likely join the ranks with some of my favorite Strokes songs. I'm happy to report that my thirst for new Strokes music has indeed been quenched, even after all this time. My favorite songs on this album are all of the singles, as well as Selfless, Eternal Summer, and Ode to the Mets. That's 6 songs right there that I absolutely loved. That's 2/3 of the album. The other 3 were alright. I feel like that's how a lot of Strokes albums are. So for the rating on this thing, I just want to tell you guys right now that my number rating is going to be based off of full listenability of the album. So based on how many songs that I may or may not skip through the album, how many songs I loved on the album, how many songs I really disliked on the album. All of that will be taken into account for the rating, as well as the album's overall mood, its continuity, its ideas, concepts, things like that. My rating will be my personal overall enjoyment of the record as a whole. That said, I'm giving this album a 7.8 out of 10. Thumb-o-meter right there. Yep. And one more thing I want to mention before this video ends. I have a new playlist up. This is a quarantine-themed playlist. I'm sure a lot of people are making these kinds of playlists right now. But I have one that I've made with some music that I've been listening to lately, and I will, of course, be updating this playlist often as new music comes out, as I find new music, and as we progress through this uncertain quarantine together. So anyway, I'll link the playlist down in the description. Please check it out. There's some great new cuts on there, including the new track from 21 Pilots. It definitely has more of a variety on it, so be sure to check it out. You might find something that you didn't think you'd like. But that's enough about that. I want to know what you think about this album. The New Abnormal, new record from the Strokes. Is it great? Does it suck? Is it in the middle? Is it too much of a return to form? Is it too experimental? I want to know your thoughts and what you think down in the comments. Go eat some tacos. Just kidding, eat some cantaloupe because it's healthier than tacos. And I will see you all in the next video. Peace.